That Homo sapiens is no match for them right now, and the evidence of that is right before us in the daily newspapers. As I sit here talking with you, the stock market is probably going down another 300 points today, or 500 points, and so forth and so on. I mean, we're getting used to it now. 600 or 700 up or down doesn't matter anymore. Well, in complex system theory, we know that when systems give that kind of behavior, erratic behavior, one extreme to the other, we know that's a sign of instability. So we've got something going on. We're entering a world of complexity where science wants to deal with and understand complexity, but we can't wrap our minds or hands around this complexity. We can't. It's impalpable, intractable, and all the things that make the scientific method work in reductionism confound, you know, what we attempt to do in holism. So we're going to have to revise the scientific method, and I don't know how. I'm not sure how. We have problems at our scale, at the ecological scale. Our systems are large and complex, like social systems being large and complex. We cannot do experiments with them. So the experimental method is foreclosed by virtue of the size and the innate properties of the systems. So we can't do that science. That's why, you know, I like to say science is a two-sided coin, and you look at one side, and that's the reductive side, and it's very well impressed. I mean, you can see the image very nicely there. Flip it over and look at the holistic side, and it's just the most inchoate sketch. Just the beginning of an outline of something there that's embodied in what? In general systems theory, in system science, in complex system theory, and so forth and so on. And notice the word theory entering my language there. It is theory. Most of what we deal with at both ends of the scale. Physics has got the same problems down at the lower end of the scale. Quantum physics, quantum mechanics, and so on, small particles operating at high speeds produce the same sorts of problems that have bedeviled physicists a little bit longer than our problems have bedeviled us.
Because the laws begin to break down that we've been relying on.
We don't have, often ecologists will say we don't have laws. We don't have laws in ecology. What are they? If we have them, what are they? In physics, what are they? The conservation principle, that gives us the ability to make energy and matter accountable. You can trace it around. You can account for it. You can count it. You can count the elements. They're both, carried by particles. And you can count the particles or their aggregates in some fashion or other. Conservation principle gives us that. Second law of thermodynamics, the dissipation principle. All our systems are open systems. All the systems of interest on the globe are open systems, and they're dissipative systems. They are far from thermodynamic equilibrium. That's part of the life process to push them away from equilibrium. But they're constantly, by virtue of the second law of thermodynamics, being worn down and brought back to thermodynamic equilibrium. So living things go against that trend, go against that grain, and to that extent they're complex right there in the need to get away from thermodynamic ground, move away from it, and build structure and organization, which is anti-entropic. Erwin Schrödinger, physicist, wrote a small but really perceptive book 4 or 5 decades ago, What is Life? And gave a really nice answer. And life, the definition of life there is living things are anti-entropic. What do? They pull in energy, matter from the surroundings. They degrade it in their metabolic processes, release heat to the surroundings. In other words, they degrade the surrounding environment, okay, at least as much as they gain in the process. So you get a local decrease of entropy, a local increase in order and organization, all right? But the surrounding system pays a price in being degraded to that extent. Outcome of that for us right now at where we are after the Industrial Revolution is global warming. Global warming, greenhouse effect, and so forth and so on. We don't know to what extent humanity is contributing to that, but but we can make an inference that we are probably contributing importantly. There have been, over geologic timescales, various epochs of climate change, and the climate change of the kind of magnitude we are seeing and projecting now that's been experienced many times before in the history of the planet. So there's nothing unusual there per se, but the agency, and particularly our one species contribution to that, the contribution of a single species like ourselves to that, to be the agency or an agency in that process is unusual, exceptional, and without precedent. The rise of the microbes way back to control the atmospheric composition of the gases on the planet and so forth, but that's an entire group of prokaryotes and eukaryotic organisms, entire groups. This is one species we're talking about, a species that we think is a fairly high-level species. I'm a systems scientist, a systems ecologist, and so I've invented this version of our species that's not here yet, but we're on the track. I've said we are Homo holisticus emerging. Okay, we are sapiens now, but we are holisticus emerging. Why? Because we are probably the first species in the history of the world, in the history of evolution, the first species that has a global reach. We can do any number of actions. A single person can pull a lever or give a command and so forth and change the world, the whole world. We're seeing now, no one's given a command, but we're seeing the world go out of whack economically. So we're becoming holisticus in that sense, that we no longer, the nature that surrounds us is no longer sufficient to contain our activity and limit its impact in the biosphere. Okay? We have impact potentially that goes beyond the usual controls that exist for other categories of organisms in ecosystems in nature.